Welcome back everyone to another episode of Rush-in Garage. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, turn on those post notifications so you don't miss any of our builds. But otherwise, we're starting to work on our continuing to work on our Wrangler. So last episode, we got most of it taken apart, most of the damage assessed. Our original plan was to buy a complete Jeep parts car. But the Jeeps are just way too much for the parts that we need from it. So what we decided to do is we bought a new frame. Well, new to us, we bought a 2010 Wrangler frame just for the front sections because these two front extensions are almost as much as a whole frame are. The extensions are actually $1,500 each. And if we were to buy the whole frame, it's $3,600. The frame that we found is $600. So we're gonna see if we can make it work. Alright guys, and what the plan is these extensions right here, they're welded in right there on both sides. But the hard part is that this gearbox and where these bolts go in, it's welded here, and there's a tube that goes all the way through, and it's welded here too. So we don't know what's going to be easier, to try just doing the front extensions or replacing the whole frame. But again, the frame that we bought is a 2010. We looked through all the forums to find out what the big difference is, because the JKs, they have been around for a while, and they just did a facelift or a slight redesign in 2012, which featured a new motor, and they redid the interior and a couple other really small things. So what our plan is, I don't know what's going to be easier, whether to swap the whole frame or just the front sections here. But the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to disconnect the body from the frame, separate the two, and we're going to bring in the frame that we bought and compare the two and measure them out and see what the big difference is between them, because they're different part numbers. But for some reason, I have a feeling we're going to be able to make them work. It's probably just one or two little brackets that they changed on them, and that's why it has a different part number. So let's get this body and frame disconnected and bring in the other frame to see what the real difference is. Alright guys, another thing you might be thinking, man, it's a huge job to get the body and the frame disconnected just to compare it, just to see if it works. But in reality, it's really not that difficult, because all we got to do, we already got our AC disconnected. We didn't have any AC in here. Disconnect the ECU. This harness goes with the engine, which stays on the frame. The brake lines, we'll also disconnect those because the booster goes with the body and the brake lines stay on the frame. We got our AC lines. Basically, we got one AC line that gets disconnected from the compressor, which will go with the body, and then a fuel line and a couple of heater hoses, and then a couple of plugs in the back. So it's really not that big a deal, especially the fact that we got almost the whole front end taken apart. And since we took off those running boards that they had on there, we already removed 4 of the bolts that hold the body and the frame together, and I think there's only like 6 more left, so not a big deal at all. Alright guys, so just for fun, let's put a timer on here to see how long it takes us to separate the cab from the frame. Alright guys, so we got 40 minutes that it took us to completely disconnect the body from the frame. And as you can see, got the whole engine here, transmission, everything stays on the frame. So now what we can do is we can bring in the other frame and compare the two, and we can measure them and compare all the brackets and everything else like that. But for some reason, I have a feeling that there's one or two, because I know that one of the big differences between the older ones and the newer JKs is they have on the front here, they have a it's a vacuum brake pump. Basically, it's when you're got low idle and everything, it gives you additional vacuum to help you hold the car in place. And we got the new frame that we ordered at the junkyard. Everything looks like it's in good condition, and so we measured out this frame. It's nice and straight, the whole thing. Well, we also compared it to the frame that came off the truck and this one, because this one did come off 2010. So everything from here back is exactly the same. All the body mounts, all the cross members, all the hangers for the exhaust, suspension, everything is exactly the same. The two things that we found that are different is, one, the newer ones that because this one came with a 3.8 and the new ones come with the 3.6, and the 3.6 has a bracket here for a electric vacuum pump, which that's not a big deal because we're going to be doing a custom bumper on there anyway, and we were going to buy a relocation bracket for this pump, which is a popular mod on these things, that's going to be up higher, up by the ABS pump here. So that's not a big deal. This bracket, not a big deal, because we're going to cut it off anyway and relocate that pump because of the custom bumper. The big difference that we can't decide right now what we want to do is this engine mount is actually the same on both cars, but they changed this one. This one needs to go back 1.25 inches. So we're trying to decide what's going to be easier, but most importantly, what's going to be a safer, better repair. To either cut off this bracket and cut it off of there and shift it back, or having to undo this weld all the way around there, the weld in here, and then it's the same thing here, but on top of that, it has these two tubes on this side that go through both of these extensions, and they hold the steering gearbox in place. So here, on top of having to grind all this, we'd have to grind these and somehow get those out and then put them all back in. Alright, so before we make our decision, we got to pull that engine no matter what, just because we got to remove the gearbox, so we have plenty of access here if we do decide to just do the front extensions. So we have plenty of access to get to all the weld spots and to get everything out. We got to pull this engine anyway. So what let's get this engine pulled, and then that way we can do a thorough investigation of these brackets, make sure that they're the same or if they're different, and make our decision from there. But let's get this engine pulled first. Alright, so we're ready to get this motor out of this frame. So we got a 4x4. There's a nice little loop there to hook up to, and one back here. We got the the engine mounts on both sides unhooked. We got the exhaust, the catalytic converters unhooked on both sides. Some fuel lines, tranny mounts, and the front drive shaft and the exhaust on there. So we should be ready to get this thing out of here so we can compare the two frames perfectly. Man, that thing's swinging. Okay, so we got the engine out. We got almost a bare frame now, exactly where the engine was. We did some further investigating between that frame and this frame, and these brackets are actually almost identical. The only little slight difference is here on the other one, it's a little bit longer, and the bracket itself on the other frame that we got is just back a little bit. So this bracket is actually exactly the same, both frames, and even though they're different years, and the only difference is this bracket just needs to be a little bit back, and that bracket for the vacuum pump. Take a look at the other frame. We already actually did a little bit of work on here. What we did is we went ahead and cut the bracket off. So we got it all cut off, and as you can see, the only difference is that this little piece of metal is not there, and then there's a couple of manufacturer stamp numbers here, and even those are the same, even though the bracket is slightly different. We also measured it on the engine itself to see if this is actually gonna do anything on this new engine. But as you can see, this little piece that's cut out on the frame that we took this engine out of, there is absolutely no reason, because we were thinking that we might need to notch it so it's the same, or possibly cut off that other bracket, but there's a ton of room here, so there's no reason to do the work twice. So what we're gonna do is actually this bracket that came on the frame that we bought, we're just gonna relocate it exactly to where it needs. Our final decision that we made is that it's gonna be a lot more practical, much more better quality repair, and we're not messing with anything structural. A bracket is gonna be a lot easier to relocate than trying to get these ends replaced. And as for the gas tank, the suspension, everything else like that, it's not that much more work to swap everything from one frame to the other. And on top of that, while we're swapping the suspension, we can go ahead and install the lift kit at the same time, because we got to uninstall it anyway, so we'll just put the new pieces in there. So that's actually going to save us time too. Another thing with this engine mount, right now, from the accident, it completely tore this mount into two pieces. So while the engine is out, that's going to make it a lot easier for us to replace it versus having to do it on the car. Also, from the accident, from the engine shifting and the exhaust and everything else like that, you can see that this hit the engine mount bracket, not the actual engine mount, but the bracket, and punctured a hole and possibly even damaged the element that's inside the catalytic converter. So this also we're going to replace while the engine is out, because it makes it a lot easier versus having to do it on the car. We also had a transmission mount that we had laying around from a previous Jeep that we did, and it's better condition than this, but we've had to replace these almost every single time. And we finally actually figured out what the problem is and not really having to replace it, but this can be fixed, because right now you can see this mount is stretched out this way. And you can see right here that this mount is touching this bracket inside, and that's what you would get vibrations from. So what we figured out is that we would just put this onto two pieces of metal or something to support it, and you can take a hammer to this side and it straightens it right out, versus where you can see that's touching. So this mount is in better condition. This one's a little bit rusty, so we're going to go ahead and use this mount. But for future, now we know that we can actually fix this mount versus having to replace it. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and clean up that other frame exactly where we cut off the bracket. That way we can reposition the bracket in order for us to weld it. Also, since this bracket is still attached, we can get all of our dimensions, our crosses, measurements. Basically with this attached, we can get the other bracket attached exactly where it needs to be. That way the engine's a perfect fit. Alright guys, so we got everything all ground down. We got all the metal cleaned up. That way we can get a nice clean weld on here. We also got some of these little magnets that you guys probably seen for the plastic that I use when I paint. But they're pretty strong, so they're holding this bracket exactly where it needs to be. We measured everything out. So now we're going to go ahead and put some tack welds. We're going to remeasure, and then if everything checks out, we're going to go ahead and weld the whole thing in. Alright guys, so we got that bracket all welded in there. Let's check out these welds. not too bad. I mean, those are, I would say those are some nice welds. The same thing on the side. We got it underneath. Actually comparing them to what the factory ones were, I think these are actually better than OEM. So we're going to clean that up, and then we're going to put some coating over it so they don't rust. So our frame that we bought is ready to go. We got this bracket on there, got everything welded nicely. We got it painted with undercoating again to prevent it from rusting. We even went ahead and swapped over the brake lines right now. On our old frame, we got all the shocks disconnected. We got the gas tank dropped, drive shafts, the rear end, the exhaust. The only thing that's really left here is to undo it here, so we can take this piece out so the exhaust can go on the floor, and the wire harness will take off, and we'll be ready to lift this frame up and out of the shop, and we can start getting the new frame to bring it back over this to get the suspension and everything else back on it, including the gas tank, basically bolting everything up so we can put the engine back into the new frame. Okay guys, so we got the old frame, the original frame out of there. Our new frame, we got it up over and hanging approximately where we need it. So one of the first steps is that we got to put the springs and shocks back in there. Also with the control arms. We are going to be lifting this kit, or this Jeep. So we're basically, instead of putting the old one on we're going to put the lift kit on it right now. So here's the lift kit that we got. Wound up going with a rough country 2.5-inch lift. Also comes with the shocks. Comes with the N2 premium upgraded shocks. So we're going to go ahead and put these shocks and springs on there and get these axles attached to the frame. So we got our frame reassembled. We got our lift kit on there. We got the shocks on there. So this is all good to go. And even with the lift kit right now, even without the motor, the body, looks pretty a lot more beefier than what it looked like when we took out the factory one. So everything turned out to be the same. All the sensors, wire harness, clips, everything, all of them, basically everything bolted right up. Okay, so the next step is to get the motor and tranny back into the frame. But before we do that, we have to replace the motor mounts. We got one taken off, we got to put a new one on there. And we also got to replace this one. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright guys, so we got the body attached to the frame. Now we can see here, this big hole right here, this little hole is supposed to be right in the middle, like over there. So we are going to need the frame machine to get this lined up and that lined up. But before we get it on the frame machine, we are going to take off the T-tops on the top and the windshield frame, just so when you're tugging on this, our T-tops and the roof are not damaged. We don't want to take any chances. So we're going to take some more stuff apart, then we're going to get it on the frame. That way we can get this straightened out and we can keep moving along. Alright guys, so we got the Jeep taken apart far enough where we're happy with it that we can go ahead and put it on the frame to get these front end rails or aprons, whatever you want to call them, get these straightened out and get the windshield frame on there, and basically so we can line everything up, fix the doors. But let's get it on the frame. We don't want to start it up yet just because we have everything taken apart and we don't want to put it together just to take it apart again. So we're going to use our trusty forklift. I'm going to roll the Jeep a little bit forward, grab it from the side, and set it on the frame. That way we can start working on it. So I got the Jeep on the frame, but that's it for this episode. Got quite a bit done in this episode. We got our frame completely swapped over. I know we were planning to get these extensions replaced, but it turned out to be easier, quicker, and better repair, in my opinion, to just have this frame swapped over. We got the rest of the Jeep taken apart, got it ready for the frame machine. Alright, so if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe, turn on your post notifications so you don't miss the next episode. And if you also haven't seen our other videos, go ahead and go take a look at it. And those of you that are subscribed already, thank you for subscribing and watching our videos, and we will see you guys in the next episode.